Jackson had heard whispers for weeks, hushed conversations in boardrooms, vague mentions in compliance memos. A tiny pharmacy on the outskirts of the city was allegedly dispensing high-cost medication without proper authorization. It sounded implausible, even reckless, but something about it wouldn't leave him alone. That morning, he left the glass tower bearing his name, stripped of the armor of wealth and status. No chauffeur, no tailored suit, just an aging man in faded jeans, a worn coat from a thrift store, and a baseball cap pulled low to hide the lines of power on his face. The only thing in his pocket was a folded prescription he couldn't afford to fill. Inside the cramped pharmacy, the air carried the scent of antiseptic mixed with something colder, like the sterile ache of places built for necessity, not comfort. A young woman stood behind the counter, her name tag catching the light, Elra. Jackson stepped forward cautiously, speaking low, unsure of what he was truly seeking. He asked for the medication scribbled on his paper. She glanced at it, typed without comment, and replied quietly, $820, 0 cents. He opened his wallet and stared at the contents. $30, maybe less, worn bills that looked as tired as he felt. Their eyes met, a quiet moment stretching out between them. She paused, reading something unspoken in his face. Then, without asking another question, she bagged the pills, pushed them toward him, and whispered, "Take care of yourself." Jackson froze. Confusion flickered across his features, then unease, then something deeper, more visceral. A gnawing dissonance. He had built an empire on the belief that order was compassion, that rules, not emotion, protected people. He had grown up in a cramped two-room apartment above a tire shop, with a father who worked overnight shifts and a mother who rationed her meals so her children could eat. They never had health insurance. When his grandfather died of a stroke, the medication he couldn't afford was never even a conversation. It was just an absence, a silent resignation. So Jackson made a vow: when he held power, he would build a system where people didn't slip through cracks, where protocols, not pity, defined who got help. Over 3 decades, he turned that promise into a fortress of regulations. His face had graced Forbes covers. His signature policy was tight control, meticulous compliance. If you controlled the medicine, you controlled the means to heal, to protect. But standing in that small pharmacy, medicine in hand, given freely by a stranger without so much as a pause, everything he believed in felt fractured. What Elra did wasn't just illegal. It was unfiltered humanity. And it stirred something in him he couldn't quite name. 3 weeks before Jackson stepped into that pharmacy, a quarterly audit crossed his desk. Most of the report was uneventful, but buried in the data was one anomaly, a regional loss centered around a tiny West Side location. Heart medications, high value, tightly regulated, kept disappearing. No break-ins, no clerical errors, just missing. The audit used clinical language, possible unauthorized distribution. But Jackson could read between the lines. Someone was giving the pills away. It wasn't about the money. $15,000, 0 cents in losses over 3 months was a rounding error in his world. What rattled him was the break-in structure, the disobedience. Someone was rewriting the rules he had built his life on. That night, he called his head of operations. No press release, no internal memo, just one sentence. "I'm going down there myself." He hadn't walked into a branch unannounced in years. But this time he left the image of the CEO behind. No tailored suit, no assistant. He dyed the gray from his beard, slipped on old sneakers, and tucked $300, 0 cents, into a wallet that had seen better days. He visited a downtown clinic and asked a doctor, one who didn't know him, for a prescription for a common heart medication one his company manufactured. He gave a false name. He needed to see the truth. Raw and unfiltered. not from spreadsheets, but from the eyes of those dispensing care. He chose the pharmacy flagged in the audit, West Side, small, almost invisible, sandwiched between a laundromat and an abandoned gas station with a flickering neon sign that buzzed in tired defiance. Inside, the silence wrapped around him. No music, no background noise, just the low hum of a fridge and the occasional tap of keys. Behind the counter stood a young woman in a plain blue coat, Elra. Late 20s, maybe. Hair pulled back, her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen more than her age should allow. She looked up when he entered. No smile, no pretense, just presence. Jackson approached slowly, handed over the prescription, told her he had no insurance, and asked for the price. She typed, hesitated. $8.20, she said. He opened his wallet, exposing 3 wrinkled bills. His hands, once steady in boardrooms and on stages, trembled slightly. He didn't say a word. Elra glanced at the money, then at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, recognition, perhaps. Not of his face, but of his situation. She reached for the medication without hesitation. No questions, no ID, no insurance forms, no mention of discount plans, just trust. She slid the pills into a small brown bag. "You can pay later," she murmured, her voice firm but gentle. "Just take care of yourself." Jackson didn't move at first. He had spent a lifetime building systems that filtered compassion through forms, approvals, and protocols, and here she was, breaking all of it, effortlessly. It wasn't charity. It was a decision. A conviction. He stepped outside without speaking, but his mind remained at that counter. He didn't go far. Instead, he crossed the street, bought a lukewarm cup of coffee from a vending machine, and sat on a splintered bench where he could see the entrance. Hours passed, and what he saw slowly unraveled everything he thought he knew. An elderly man arrived with a plastic bag full of coins. Elra counted each one without irritation, then handed him his medication and gave a few coins back. Later, a young mother with a crying toddler came in, holding a crumpled prescription. No money. Elra nodded, disappeared for a moment, then returned with the medication. No drama, just a whisper, "Take care." Jackson watched. Again and again she gave without registering the sale, but she wasn't careless. After every interaction, she reached under the counter and pulled out a small notebook, faded blue, corners curled from use. Inside, she jotted down notes with a black pen. Names, dates, what was taken. Sometimes a quiet reminder, "Come back next Friday." This wasn't disorder. It was quiet rebellion. Disciplined, intentional, and deeply human. This wasn't randomness. It was intention. It was structure disguised as rebellion. Elra wasn't reckless. She was purposeful. Every choice she made, every rule she bent, was part of something deeper, something more human than policy ever accounted for. Jackson leaned forward on the cold bench across the street, an uncomfortable churn rising in his chest. This wasn't theft. It wasn't negligence. It was conviction. A quiet, unwavering belief that the system, as efficient as it tried to be, wasn't always just. And for the first time, he was beginning to see it. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the pharmacy door creaked open once more. A man in his 60s stepped inside, wearing a jacket patched with a faded military insignia. His steps were slow, shoulders stiffened by age and memory. He approached the counter and held out a crumpled prescription. "It's for my wife," he murmured. "She just got out of the hospital." Elra read the paper, turned toward the shelves, and retrieved a box of pills. When she told him the price, his shoulders sank. He didn't argue, just lowered his gaze and whispered, "I don't get my benefits until next week." Elra didn't hesitate. She simply slid the box toward him and shook her head gently. She needs it now. Bring what you can, when you can. The man stood frozen for a moment, absorbing not just the medicine but the dignity she preserved. He tucked the box into his coat with trembling hands and said, "Thank you." Like it hurt to accept, and still, he meant it. Inside, hidden between shelves of dusty, cold medicine, Jackson watched. Something shifted again. This wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was grace, handed over with no receipt and no judgment. Elra wasn't trying to be a hero. She was being necessary. Later that evening, Jackson stepped back inside, pretending to browse. He waited until the store was empty, then approached the counter. Elra looked up, calm but curious. He leaned in slightly, voice low. "Do you always do that?" She tilted her head. "Do what?" "Give people medicine they can't pay for." Pause. Then the smallest smile curved on her lips. Quiet and tired. "Only when it's needed," she said. There was no explanation, no attempt to justify or defend, just a truth she carried with ease. Jackson nodded once and walked away. But the words, "only when it's needed," lodged deep inside him. They echoed louder than any policy he'd ever written. His systems had no room for answers like that. They were built to count, to control. But this was too real to quantify. The next morning, it happened. Mid-morning, an elderly woman collapsed just outside the pharmacy door, hands clutching her chest. Elra saw it instantly. Without waiting, she bolted from behind the counter, knelt beside the woman, and called her name again and again. Her hands moved quickly. She found a nitroglycerin spray, gently tilted the woman's head, and helped her take a dose. Her voice never wavered. Her hands didn't shake. Jackson stood only feet away, stunned. Elra stayed with the woman until her breathing eased. Then she helped her sit up, leaning her gently against the wall before disappearing into the pharmacy. Moments later, she returned with a cup of water and a small packet of pills. "She needs these now," she said softly. "We'll deal with the rest later." There were no forms, no emergency protocol, just action, just instinct. Then the door swung open again, heavier this time. Grant, the branch manager, entered with a clipboard and stormed toward the scene. "Again?" he barked. "You gave it away without logging it?" Elra stood, steady and silent. "She didn't have time to wait," she said simply. "That's not your call," Grant snapped. "We have procedures." Elra didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She helped the elderly woman to a chair and quietly returned to the counter. Grant muttered something under his breath and stormed to the back office. Jackson didn't reveal himself, but inside something cracked again. Elra wasn't hiding. She wasn't ashamed. She just didn't care about being right, only about doing what was needed. That night, alone in his motel room, Jackson watched the footage he had taken. Elra running to help, Grant confronting her, her calm defense. He didn't add commentary. He didn't edit. He sent it to the compliance team marked confidential, with no explanation, just two names, Grant, Elra. He also saved an audio recording, just ambient sounds. Elra's voice, Grant's frustration, his own steps echoing on the tile floor. Jackson still hadn't made a decision, but he knew now. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was a pattern. It was the heart of something much larger than one pharmacy. By the next morning, corporate had responded, a short, clipped email, the footage reviewed, the audio archived, an internal hearing scheduled, immediate action recommended. The subject line read, "Policy breach, urgent review required." Eller's name was bolded, followed by timestamps, item codes, and the formal charge, unauthorized dispensing of controlled medication, Repeated behavior. Evidence confirmed. No mention of the woman who collapsed. No mention of lives quietly saved. Just metrics. Just violations. Jackson stared at the screen. The very system he built now moving swiftly, mercilessly, against the one person who didn't try to hide a thing. By midweek, the ripple had spread. Elra knew she was being watched. The register was audited twice daily. Grant stayed longer, hovering near the counter like a shadow. A second staffer was assigned to her shift, unusual for a store this small. But Elra didn't change. A man with swollen fingers came in, no ID, asking for arthritis meds. She gave him half a bottle and said, "Come back when you can." A teenage girl whispered that her dad had been skipping doses to save money. Elrath didn't ask for proof. She just turned to the shelf. And every time, instead of the digital register, she reached for that battered blue notebook. Her own system. Her own ledger of humanity. Jackson found himself in the back aisle more often now, pretending to read labels, listening, not for rules, but for courage, for certainty. She wasn't rebellious. She was resolute. That afternoon, a young woman in her 30s rushed in, carrying a small boy against her chest. His breathing was shallow, labored. His lips held a bluish tint. Panic shimmered in her eyes. "I can't afford the refill yet," she whispered. "But he hasn't slept. He's getting worse." Elra didn't pause. She moved with that same quiet urgency. Because the answer was already inside her. Only when it's needed. Elra didn't even blink. She moved with practiced calm, her motions sharp but gentle. She reached behind the counter, grabbed a new inhaler, double-checked the dosage, then handed it to the woman with steady hands and a voice so soft it felt like a lifeline. "Don't let him stop breathing," she said. The mother nodded quickly, eyes glassy with fear and something that looked like relief's younger, more desperate cousin. She clutched her son tighter, whispered thanks through trembling lips again and again, and bolted out the door without waiting for permission. No record was made, no barcode scanned, just one more note in Elra's faded notebook. Asthma emergency, return next Friday. Jackson, still standing near the vitamin shelf, had seen it all, and it hit him, not like a thought, but like oxygen filling lungs after drowning. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about breath, about life itself. The next morning, Grant arrived early. He didn't greet Elra, didn't glance in her direction. He went straight to the back office, shutting the door behind him with finality. By midday, the final report had been compiled, surveillance footage pieced together, timestamps cross-checked with missing inventory logs, screenshots captured moments when medication was dispensed, without transactions logged. There were no surprises for Jackson. He had seen it all unfold firsthand. Clips were clipped into silence. Elra handing an inhaler to the mother, giving heart pills to the veteran, kneeling beside the woman who collapsed outside the door. Grant labeled each as repeated violation, marked them all, non-compliance, immediate action required. He forwarded the report to corporate with a single sentence attached, urgent, staff acting outside all approved protocols. Jackson received a blind copy within minutes. He read every word, watched every clip, but what once would have validated the integrity of the system now made him feel cornered. Not because he doubted Elra's actions, but because he knew exactly how the system would respond. There would be no leniency, no context, just swift enforcement. And Elra? She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't try to defend herself. He could see that now, clearer than any report. That evening, while Elra was busy helping a patient in the back, Jackson moved quietly behind the counter. It felt like trespassing, even though it wasn't. He found her notebook tucked beneath a stack of outdated flyers. Its cover was worn smooth, corners curling with use. He opened it slowly, carefully, like it held something sacred. And it did. Names, first names only, each accompanied by small notations, dosages, conditions, return dates, some circled, paid, others marked, still owed, arrows pointed to future days. Next Tuesday, bringing cash with sister, partial payment received. Over 30 names, no dollar totals, no formal signatures. Just trust. Jackson's eyes stopped on a single line. Mr. K, paid full, hugged me after. His throat tightened. This wasn't just some rogue method. It wasn't rebellion for its own sake. It was an emotional ledger, a record not of sales but of compassion. It was memory made tangible, a silent testament to relationships built not on rules but on need. He closed the notebook gently, returning it to its place, its rightful place. Later that day, one of the younger staff members, Noah, joined Jackson near the back shelves. They worked in silence, restocking pill bottles. Then, in a voice so soft it barely rose above the sound of packaging plastic, Noah said, "She saved my mom once." Jackson didn't respond, just turned slightly, listening. It was a Sunday, nothing open, no doctors. My mom's blood pressure tanked. I didn't know what to do. I called Elra, not even expecting an answer. Noah paused, voice steady. She showed up in 20 minutes, brought meds from her own bag, sat with us until Mom stabilized. She didn't ask for anything, just made sure we were okay. He turned his head slightly toward Jackson. Never seen anyone do this job for a better reason. Jackson didn't reply. He couldn't. The notebook, the whispered thanks, the lives restored. Not through policy, but presence. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't just about a broken rule. It was about whether the machine he'd built could even recognize goodness when it didn't come with a receipt. That night, Jackson sat in his car behind the pharmacy, engine off, windows rolled down. The back windows of the building glowed dimly, and he stared through the darkness as if it could offer answers. He thought of all of it, the reports, the footage, the notebook, the stories, the moments no spreadsheet could contain. He had spent his life believing structure was safety, that order meant fewer mistakes, that good intentions had to be restrained by process. But now, those same rules felt hollow, empty. They couldn't capture Elra's timing, her compassion, her quiet courage. They couldn't measure the moment when someone needed help now, not after approval. And for the first time in years, he asked himself, was the system he'd built really protecting anyone? Or was he just too afraid to tear it down? By Thursday, the numbers became the headline. $15,000, 0 cents in unaccounted medication. What was once a policy violation was now a liability. Legal got involved. Compliance escalated it. Insurance partners demanded clarification. Emails flooded his inbox. Each one cold, clinical, unauthorized dispensing, no billing records, repeat misconduct. None of them mentioned the collapsed woman, or the child struggling to breathe, or the veteran with hollow eyes. Just numbers, just loss. The machine he'd built, clean, predictable, efficient, was now moving faster than he could stop it. He used to take pride in its speed. Now, he felt trapped inside it. By Friday morning, the air inside the pharmacy was different. No casual chatter, no soft jokes, just silence, tight and heavy. Elra was called into the back office. Grant was waiting. A printed report spread across the desk. A man from compliance appeared on a video screen. A single sheet of paper lay waiting, her name at the top. "We need a written statement," Grant said. "Full explanation. Sign and return today." Elra looked at the paper. Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes dimmed. "I'll write it," she said quietly. She didn't protest, Didn't ask questions. She just sat down at the corner desk, picked up a pen, and began to write. Jackson watched from beyond the glass. Every fiber in his body screamed that this wasn't justice. She wasn't being heard. She was being processed, and the system didn't care for reasons. It only wanted her compliance. By noon, she handed the paper in. Short, direct, no excuses. I dispensed medication without charging patients when I believed delay could cause harm. I did not enter these transactions into the system. I kept a manual record. I understand this was against policy, but if I were faced with the same moments again, I would do the same thing. Grant read it in silence. The compliance rep raised an eyebrow. Is that your official position? Elra nodded. Yes. There was no defiance in her voice, no dramatics, just conviction. She wasn't proud, she wasn't apologizing, she was simply clear. Jackson stood outside the office, listening. She wasn't stubborn. She was certain. Later that afternoon, Grant approached Jackson near the back stockroom, still unaware of who he really was. It's gone too far, he said under his breath. We need to act. Jackson didn't respond, not yet. But the decision was already forming deep within him, just not the one Grant expected. Grant handed Jackson a printed form. The title across the top read Temporary Suspension Pending Investigation. It's standard, Grant said, his voice clipped. Nothing personal. Corporate needs this signed today. Jackson held the paper in both hands, his eyes scanning the familiar language, but his gaze stopped at one specific line. Reason for suspension. It had already been filled out. Unauthorized dispensing. Repeated non-compliance. Risk to corporate integrity. He didn't move. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She's good at her job, Jackson said, voice low. Grant frowned. That's not the point. We follow structure for a reason. If one person breaks it, others will follow. But Jackson didn't answer. He stared at the space meant for his signature, a pen hovering in his hand, and felt the full weight of what the system was asking of him. To punish someone not for harming, but for saving lives. He told Grant he needed more time. But time, he could feel, was slipping away. That evening, as the pharmacy lights dimmed and the last customer left, Jackson approached Grant again. This isn't a quiet issue anymore, he said. If she's going to be suspended, people deserve to hear it out loud. Grant raised an eyebrow. You want a staff meeting? Jackson nodded. Open. No screens, no paperwork. Just everyone in one room. Let them see what this is really about. Grant let out a sharp breath, clearly annoyed. We're not here to run town halls. No, Jackson said. We're here to serve people. Let's start with our own team. Reluctantly, Grant agreed. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning, before opening hours. Every employee would attend. Compliance would join via video. And for the first time, Elra would have to speak, not as a whisper behind a counter, but as a person defending her truth in front of everyone. Jackson didn't know what she'd say, but he knew she wouldn't lie. The next morning, the team filed into the break room. The chairs scraped quietly across the floor. Coffee sat untouched. No one looked directly at anyone else. Some stood with crossed arms. Others sat, silent, unsure. Grant began with the cold efficiency of someone used to rules. We're here to address repeated violations of company policy regarding medication distribution. A technician, young anxious, spoke first. She didn't follow the rules. That's all that matters. If she gets a pass, what's the point of procedure? Another technician cut in before Grant could respond. She helped people, real people. Half of us know someone she saved. The room cracked open. Voices rose. Some spoke of risk, others of trust. One side chanted policy, liability, order. The other side countered with memory, kindness, survival. Jackson stayed in the corner, watching it all unfold. This wasn't just a policy debate anymore. This was a fracture between order and compassion, between fear and truth. And then, the front door creaked open. Everyone turned. An older man stepped into the room, leaning on a cane. His jacket was loose on his frail frame, his breath shallow but certain. "I'm sorry," he said, voice gravelly. "I know I'm not supposed to be here." Grant opened his mouth, but the man raised a hand. "I heard there was a meeting about Elra." He looked around, finally settling his gaze on her. "She gave me medicine when no one else would. No forms, no questions. She is the reason I'm still breathing." The room fell completely silent. It wasn't defense, it was testimony. Elra stood slowly. No one asked her to speak, but no one stopped her either. "The first time I broke protocol," she said, voice quiet but clear. "It wasn't a decision. It was instinct." She paused, steadying herself. "My mother died at home. She had heart failure. We didn't have insurance. I begged the pharmacy for help, but the policy was strict. Payment first. I couldn't get it in time." Her hands stayed still. Her face didn't tremble. "She passed before I came back. I told myself that day if I ever stood on the other side of the counter, I wouldn't make someone prove they deserved to breathe." She looked around the room. "Swore I wouldn't let it happen again." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her loss had already shaped her. It lived in the way she moved, the way she acted, not for praise, but because she couldn't bear to stand still when someone else was slipping away. No one spoke. Then Jackson stood. He hadn't planned to. Slowly, he reached for the cap on his head, unzipped the thrift store jacket, and revealed the truth behind the disguise. Gasps, murmurs. Grant's face went pale. Someone started. "Yes," Jackson said. "I'm the CEO." He scanned the room. "I came here undercover to understand what was happening. I thought I'd find disobedience. I thought I'd find carelessness." His voice cracked, but he continued. "What I found was humanity. Something our systems stopped making room for." He reached into his bag and placed a speaker on the table, pressed play. Shaky audio filled the room. Footsteps, street noise, then Ayla's voice. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with me, please." Then the sound of a pill bottle, a paper bag, water. And finally her voice again, breaking. "Please don't die in front of me." No one moved. "That moment," Jackson said, "was never meant to be policy. But it's everything we forgot medicine was about." He looked at them, not as a CEO, but as a man who had once believed in walls. "We built this company to save lives," he said, "not bury them under paperwork." He turned to Elra. She didn't break her mission. She remembered it, fully, bravely, in a way I had forgotten was even possible. He paused. "Elra will not be fired." Heads turned. Grant stiffened. "In fact, she will serve as lead advisor for a new national program, a patient assistance fund. Less red tape, more humanity." The room stirred, not in rebellion, but in stunned respect. She knows the real gaps. She's lived them. And now, we'll fix them. In Serf, no one clapped. But the silence that followed was something else. Recognition. Then Maya, the technician who once argued for Ali's suspension, stood. "I was wrong," she said. "I thought rules held this place together. But you were holding people together." Her voice cracked. "Didn't see it, I didn't want to." Elra met her gaze, just nodded, nothing more. The tension that had filled the room for days finally broke, not in triumph, but in truth. Jackson turned to Grant. "We do need rules," he said, "but we must never forget why they exist." He stepped forward. When the rules become more important than the people they were made to protect, we don't have a system. We have a wall. The room absorbed every word. Elra stood, still and calm. Her hands finally relaxed at her sides, and then the smallest smile, not one of pride, one of release, of finally being seen. 1 month later, the change had begun. Across clinics, envelopes arrived stamped, patient assistance approved. Inside, vouchers, cards, clear instructions, no jargon, just help. A single mom clutched her son's inhaler like it was gold. A veteran whispered, "I didn't think anyone saw me anymore." Elra didn't stand at those counters. She didn't need to. Her fingerprints were there in the design, in every choice that put people first. And in a quiet cemetery one gray morning, Elra knelt beside her mother's grave. She placed a bottle of heart medication on the stone. "This time, Mom, you won't be turned away." She didn't cry, not because she wasn't still healing, but because something had come full circle. And for the first time, she knew. She had kept her promise. At the top of a skyscraper, Jackson stood in his office, staring down at the city he helped shape. Offices, warehouses, a system he built. But now he understood. Strength isn't in how tightly you hold control. It's in knowing when to change. He thought of Elra, of her defiance, her clarity. She hadn't broken his world. It reminded him what it was built for. He picked up the phone. "We're starting over," he said. And this time he meant it. Because if you think compassion lives only in one small pharmacy on the edge of town, you haven't heard what's coming from the south. Not yet, but you will.